to begin in the nation's capital, where President Bola Tinubu has returned to Abuja after a two-day visit to Guinea Bissau, where he met heads of government at the 63rd Ordinary Session of the Authority of ECOWAS. He was received by the Chief of Staff, Femi Gbajabiamila, former Kebbi Governor Atiku Bagudu, former Jigawa Governor Abubakar Baduru, and former Kano Governor Abdullahi Ganduje. At the meeting, President Tinubu was appointed the Chairman of ECOWAS. Shortly after emerging Chairman of ECOWAS, President Tinubu says he's worried about military takeovers in his sub-region that truncates democratic governance. He called for collective action from member states and pledged that his leadership will push ECOWAS closer to achieving the goals set and fulfilling dreams of his founding fathers. I have joining me on the news at 10 to discuss the ECOWAS Summit, an African Affairs analyst, Larry Suraj. Good to have you join us.
Good evening.
So President Tinubu is emerging ECOWAS chairman just barely 41 days after taking office. Talk to us about how significant this is and then what this means for the perception of Nigeria within the region and the continent.
Well, I think it is just, if you want to look at it from the beginning, so let me just start from where you actually submitted. If you look at the perception of Nigeria from the sub-region, I mean, quite a number of the West African and African countries believe quite strongly that Nigeria has a very significant and leadership role to play in the region and also sub-region when you look at the West African sub-region. And that with the new government, it might also be an indication that things is likely to change for the good. And then also Nigeria is really ready to play the leading role. But when you also want to look at it from the also perception of the emergence of President Tinubu, I think it would have really been a bit better for the president to have allowed himself to concentrate first and foremost on the national issues and then understand quite better and also get even more familiar with the regional politics before emerging as the ECOWAS chairman. I think there's a whole lot of work to be done at the local level, in the country most especially, than just also taking on the additional responsibility of the chairman of ECOWAS. Yes, Nigeria needs to play that role that is required of it, but it is not necessary that it is only when you become the chairman of the ECOWAS that you can play both the significant and leading role that is expected of the country as a whole. But now that it has happened, and the president is already just emerged as the chairman of ECOWAS, I would want to believe and expect that he understands the additional responsibility and burden that this is going to place on his shoulder, and he would be able to also gather enough hands around him that would play the needed political, economic, and social responsibility of repositioning ECOWAS to deal with some of the critical issues that are bedeviling the sub-region.
Let's talk about the, because he mentioned a lot of things in his speech, and he touched on governance, he touched on peace and security, he touched on promotion of trade and investment, and lots more. But I want to talk about governance because in the wake of the coup in three different countries in West Africa, we saw people rejoicing on the streets of Mali that the military had taken over. And the recurring narrative was that perhaps some leaders in the West African region are out of touch, with the reality on ground. I know that these are sovereign state countries, by themselves. But do you think that perhaps the president can help drive that people-centered, governance at this time that it is highly needed in the region?
Yeah, I mean, this is very critical because I listened to the statement just like you rightly also observed, and the president promised that, coup will not be tolerated in the sub-region in any of our nearest future, and also should be a thing of the past. But one of the things that is actually really missing from that statement is the need to also send that note of warning to his colleague head of states and presidents to understand the need to operate within the ambit of the law, for them to uphold constitutionality in their countries, for them to be accountable and also transparent in the management of their affairs, for them to also allow for public participation in governance, for them to allow for criticism and also freedom of the press. So if you want to hide under the periodic electoral process of legitimizing dictatorship, then you should expect that over time, there will be that level of resistance that might actually truncate whatever it is that you're having to do in the country. So it will not be sufficient for the leaders in this country who would want to, because they are able to change the constitution, run for election, more than the terms that are originally allowed within the ambit of the law, only because they wield the influence or connection of power to manipulate the process. They are actually the ones that are responsible for the breakdown of law and order and also constitutionality, not just the people that will organize and arrange or execute coups in those countries. These are the leaders who are laying the foundation, for such undemocratic system to overrun the country. So the first warning and understanding would need to go to those leaders who would want to subvert the wills of the people and then also just want to perpetuate themselves in power. This is how we can talk about governance. This is how we can actually be responsible. And this is how the rule of law can operate in any system.
Mm. And let's talk about his statement on trade and investment. And I want to take it from the perspective of the ECOWAS Protocol. We've seen some of the countries within the region also breach, that protocol. When Nigeria shut its borders, a lot of countries, the other countries in West Africa thought that was a breach of protocol. And Nigerian traders had issues in Ghana. People also felt that was a breach of the protocol. What can the president do to ensure that that protocol is respected and that countries, within the region also do more business, with each other?
Yeah, I mean, there's no law that is actually, and there's no condition that is actually without exceptions. So there are situations that are expected to allow for the free operations of some of these agreements, some of these conventions and treaties. When some of those trades associated with some measure of insecurity, and when the actors are unable also to promote some of the expected ingredients of those enforcements, then it becomes just not inevitable that you would have some of those breaches actually happening in some of the cases inevitably. So where there's not been sufficient mechanisms to protect, and promote as much as possible the fair and equitable operation of the trade, it can be to the disadvantage of some of those countries that are expected to respect the trade agreement. So, of course, Nigeria will need to put its house in order. Nigeria will be expected to also position itself to benefit from the free trade agreement that is being promoted. Nigeria will have to encourage and also support its citizens and also its business to be part of the ultimate beneficiaries of such a situation. But I think with some of the latest developments that the new government is promising in terms of the economic reforms within the country, this can, as much as possible, allow for the first and foremost, there must be this national, and that is the internal stabilization of any country before you want to open yourself up for external trade agreement and the rest of that. So you can't open your border to the vulnerability of your own citizens because you want to also be part of an agreement that will benefit, or that will put the benefit of the foreigners at the expense of the national. So I think the first thing is to see how we are well positioned to equally benefit from whatever it is that we're reaching out in terms of trade with our neighbors, sisters, and brothers.
I will see. We will see the reforms that the president would initiate in his one-year rotational, office of the chairman, of the heads of state and authority of the ECOWAS. But we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for talking to us. Larry Suraj, African Affairs Analyst.
Thank you very much for having me.